Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into something a little unexpected. The Viking obsession with soap. Yes, soap. You probably didn't think you'd be hearing about soap when it comes to Viking warriors, did you? But trust me, this little bar of cleanliness might just be the most weaponized object you never knew about. And if you're anything like me, you're probably imagining a Viking holding up a soapy bar like a fierce battle axe. Well, stick around and I'll show you just how close to the truth that really is. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Don't forget to share where you're watching from and what time it is, because this journey is best enjoyed when we all take a moment to relax together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Vikings were warriors, sure, but they were also very practical people. One of the things they are most famous for is their surprising attention to cleanliness, which might not be the first thing you think of when picturing those fierce, horned-helmeted figures charging across the seas. But here's the kicker. Vikings, in their battles and explorations, were known for using something as unassuming as soap as a weapon. You heard that right, soap. Historians still argue whether Vikings truly understood soap's chemical properties, but they certainly knew its value in their daily lives. And yes, in battle. You see, soap was more than just a tool for hygiene. It was a vital part of their routines, helping them stay healthy and prepared for the grueling conditions they faced during long campaigns. Imagine this: a Viking, fresh from a voyage across the rough seas, using a bar of soap to scrub off not just the salt water and grime but also to prep for the next battle. The real power of soap? It wasn't just cleanliness. It was the Vikings' secret to strength, endurance, and even strategy. The Vikings didn't just raid and pillage, they also had a reputation for being meticulous about personal hygiene. You might be thinking, wait, didn't they just wear leather and fur and call it a day? Well, not quite. The Viking warrior wasn't just a tough exterior, they were keen on cleanliness and used soap regularly. And no, it wasn't just a casual scrub every now and then, it was a full-on ritual for them. You see, the Vikings didn't just have battles over territory, but they had their own personal wars against dirt, oil, and disease. Historians have noted that Viking hygiene practices were quite advanced for their time, with evidence showing that they bathed regularly, a concept not so popular in many other parts of medieval Europe. But this wasn't just about being squeaky clean. It was also about being ready for whatever came next, whether that was a long voyage or a battle. Soap was an essential part of that preparation. In fact, Viking warriors were known to use soap as part of their grooming regimen, including washing their hair and bodies before heading out to war. It might sound absurd in today's world, where shampoo and soap are conveniently available at every corner, but for the Vikings this was a serious matter. Historians still argue whether soap was considered a luxury or a necessary tool for the Vikings. Some believe it was part of their daily routine, while others think it was a special item reserved for their elite warriors. But one thing's for sure, the Vikings understood the importance of keeping themselves healthy, both in body and mind. And in an era when cleanliness could determine whether or not a warrior would fall ill, soap was not just for washing away dirt. It was for strengthening the very foundation of a Viking's body. Now you might be wondering, did soap actually make the Vikings stronger? Well, it's not as simple as soap equals strength, but hear me out. The Vikings were known for their extraordinary physical endurance, and much of that was attributed to their way of life. Their rigorous training, constant exposure to the elements, and the physically demanding nature of their raids were key factors. But there's an argument to be made that their daily hygiene routine played a surprisingly important role in maintaining their health and strength. Historians still argue whether it was the soap itself or the consistent bathing rituals that contributed to their stamina. Some say the Viking use of soap was a form of prevention against illnesses like lice or skin diseases, while others point out that the act of washing could also improve circulation, especially when combined with the cold northern water. Picture this: after a long, exhausting day of training or sailing, these warriors would wash off the sweat, grime, and salt water with soap. Perhaps a humble task, but one that kept them feeling invigorated and ready to tackle the next battle. Viking soap wasn't just any soap, by the way. They created it using animal fats mixed with lye, a naturally occurring substance that could be extracted from wood ash. This type of soap was quite effective for cleaning and even had some antiseptic properties. You could say that they had a sort of ancient natural soap, which not only made them feel fresh but may have even helped keep their skin from infections that could have been deadly on long voyages. So, was it a stretch to say that soap made them stronger? Maybe. But in the world of Vikings, where survival depended on every edge, soap was one of those little things that could make a big difference. In fact, there are even tales of Vikings using soap to wash away more than just dirt. They believed it could cleanse their spirits too. The idea of soap being not just a physical cleanser but a spiritual one was likely a key reason they were so diligent about it. After all, they were a people deeply connected to their gods, their rituals, and their health. Soap wasn't just a necessity, it was a part of maintaining their warrior spirit. Speaking of the Viking warrior spirit, let's talk about the legendary berserkers. These were the warriors who were said to fight in a frenzy, with no regard for their own safety, often seemingly impervious to pain. Berserkers were the stuff of myth, but their real impact on Viking culture was undeniable. But here's the twist. Some historians speculate that soap played a role in fueling this almost supernatural strength and fury. How, you ask? Well, the answer may surprise you. There's a fascinating theory that Viking berserkers used soap as part of their battle preparation. It's believed that the soapy mixture, when combined with cold water, helped invigorate their bodies and sharpen their focus. Historians still argue whether it was a ceremonial ritual or a physical necessity, but the common thread is that the berserkers, with their wild battle cries and seemingly endless energy, may have used bathing rituals as part of their warrior culture. Imagine this. Before heading into battle, a berserker would take a long, cold bath and scrub away any fear, doubts, or fatigue. It was almost like a physical ritual to awaken the beast inside. But that's not all. Some researchers suggest that the Vikings believed that bathing with soap could trigger a release of certain bodily chemicals that would boost their adrenaline. There's no concrete evidence to prove this, of course, but it's a tantalizing thought. Perhaps the soap wasn't just a cleanser for the body, but a stimulator for the Viking warrior's mind. After all, the human body reacts to cold water and physical contact in a way that can prime it for intense action. So, maybe there was something more to the Viking baths than just cleanliness. Of course, this theory has its detractors. Many argue that the berserkers' frenzied battle states were more likely due to intense mental preparation, herbal stimulants, or even a sort of battle trance. But no matter what caused the berserkers' rage, one thing is certain. They were a unique part of Viking culture, and their connection to Viking hygiene rituals adds an interesting layer to the mythology. Now, let's move away from the berserkers for a moment and look at another aspect of Viking life where soap had an unexpected role, on their iconic ships. If you're imagining a Viking longship, you probably picture a beautifully crafted vessel designed to slice through the waves, sturdy and sleek. But did you know that these ships were also a place where soap was put to good use? That's right. Soap didn't just stay in the personal hygiene section of Viking life. It was also a critical part of their seafaring world. Historians still argue whether soap was primarily used to wash the decks of these ships or to keep the sailors themselves clean during long voyages, but the reality was that long journeys on the open sea were dirty, grimy affairs. When Vikings set sail, they didn't have the luxury of stopping by a local harbor to freshen up. Instead, they relied on their own supplies to maintain cleanliness. And yes, soap was part of that kit. The salty sea air, combined with the physical strain of rowing and navigating, meant that Viking sailors were constantly exposed to grime and bacteria. But soap, when mixed with cold water, helped remove dirt and sweat and even fought off infections, which were rampant on long trips. While it may seem odd to think of soap being used on a ship, it makes perfect sense when you think about how the Vikings valued health and strength. They weren't just focused on their ship's construction. They were also focused on maintaining their physical condition, and that meant staying clean, especially when disease could spread like wildfire in such close quarters. But the soap had another important use on the ship, preserving the wood. Soap was sometimes used to treat the wooden planks of Viking ships to protect them from the salt water. Salt can cause wood to warp and rot over time, but soap worked as a protective barrier, helping to extend the life of the ship. In fact, some sources suggest that Viking shipbuilders used a special type of soap, made from animal fat and ash, to coat the hulls of their vessels. It was a humble, simple solution to a big problem. Who knew soap was also a Viking shipbuilder's secret weapon? Let's take a moment to dive into the fascinating world of Viking trade, where soap had a surprisingly significant role. Now, when you think of Viking trade routes, your mind likely jumps to furs, silver, and weapons. But you might be surprised to learn that soap was also part of the Vikings' commercial network, traded across vast distances, from the icy north to the bustling markets of the Mediterranean. Soap wasn't just a tool for personal hygiene. It became a commodity, an essential item that helped connect Viking societies with cultures far beyond their shores. Historians still argue about whether soap was a luxury good or a widely used product. Some believe it was a premium item, reserved for the wealthier members of Viking society, while others claim it was part of every Viking household, used as part of their daily routines. What is clear, however, is that soap was highly valued, and it traveled along the same routes that brought Viking warriors into contact with other civilizations. The Vikings were master traders, and soap became one of the many goods they exchanged. In some markets, soap was even traded like currency, with a set amount of soap being used to barter for other goods. Imagine the bustling markets of the Viking Age, traders haggling over furs, iron, and, surprisingly, soap. It wasn't just a luxury for the rich, it was something essential for daily life, something that kept the Vikings healthy and ready for their travels. But it wasn't just about bartering with other Viking clans. Soap was also traded with the Byzantine Empire, the Arab world, and even further south into the Mediterranean. These connections were vital for the Vikings, allowing them to expand their influence and gain access to new technologies, ideas, and, of course, goods like soap. The simple act of exchanging soap helped weave a web of Viking commerce that stretched across continents. It's a testament to how something so seemingly small could have such a large impact on their economy and their relationships with distant cultures. Now, let's dive into a somewhat unexpected but essential aspect of Viking soap, the medical side. You might think of soap as something purely for cleaning, but for the Vikings, it had medicinal uses as well. And not just for cleansing wounds, though that was certainly one of its functions. Soap was also part of their rudimentary healthcare system, playing a role in preventing illness and maintaining hygiene in a time when disease spread easily through close quarters. Historians still argue about the exact role soap played in Viking medicine. Some believe it was used as a form of antiseptic, helping to clean wounds and prevent infections, something that was incredibly important during Viking raids and voyages. In a world without antibiotics, keeping cuts and scrapes clean was crucial for survival. Soap made from animal fats and lye may have been one of the few effective ways to clean and disinfect these wounds. Viking healers likely understood that keeping the body clean helped prevent disease, even if they didn't fully understand the science behind it. But whatever the reason, soap was an integral part of their healthcare routine. What's also fascinating is how the Vikings might have used soap in their everyday preventative health rituals. Imagine this. After a long day of fighting or sailing, a Viking might wash away the day's grime with soap, not only to feel fresh but to maintain their overall health. The Vikings weren't just warriors, they were also farmers, builders, and traders, and they understood that staying healthy was key to being able to keep up with the demands of their world. Soap helped keep them in top condition, ready to face the next challenge. And speaking of challenges, let's not forget the Viking concept of sickness. The Vikings didn't always see disease in the way we do today. Instead, they might have believed that physical maladies were the result of spiritual imbalances or displeasing the gods. Soap, as a tool of cleanliness, may have been considered a way to ward off bad spirits or appease the gods by purifying oneself. Whether they saw it as a religious act or just a practical step, it's clear that soap played a role in their approach to personal health, one that combined practical needs with cultural beliefs. Let's move from the practical to the more creative side of Viking soap making. Sure, we've talked about how soap helped keep them clean and healthy, but have you ever wondered how they actually made it? The Vikings didn't have fancy factories or automated soap dispensers like we do today. They had to rely on the natural materials available to them. And their soap-making techniques were nothing short of impressive. Historians still argue about the exact process Vikings used to make soap, but the general consensus is that it involved a few key ingredients: animal fat and lye, a caustic substance produced by burning wood. The Vikings would mix animal fat with the ashes from wood fires to create lye, which they would then combine with the fat to form soap. This homemade soap wasn't the bubbly, fragrant stuff we're used to today, but it was incredibly effective for its intended purpose: cleaning. What's even more interesting is that Viking soap wasn't just for washing the body. It was used in a variety of other ways too. Some scholars suggest that the Vikings used their homemade soap to treat their hair, giving it a bit of shine and protection against the elements. Others argue that soap was also used for cleaning their clothes, an important task for anyone living in the rugged conditions of the Viking world. After all, when you're raiding and traveling across the seas, keeping your clothes clean and free from lice is no small feat. But Viking soap was more than just a practical item. It was also a symbol of their resourcefulness. The fact that they could take something as simple as animal fat and wood ash and turn it into a useful, everyday item shows just how innovative and self-sufficient the Vikings were. They didn't have the luxury of running to the store to pick up soap. They had to make do with what they had. And in their case, they made something incredibly effective that helped them thrive in some of the harshest conditions imaginable. Now, you might be wondering how Viking soap fits into their daily life beyond hygiene. Well, let's talk about the Viking settlements and how soap was an integral part of their communal life. Viking settlements were not just places of shelter and safety. They were tightly knit communities where cleanliness and health were central to their survival. The Vikings may have been fierce warriors, but they also had a very strong sense of community, and maintaining the health of the group was a crucial part of their survival strategy. Historians still argue whether soap was a widespread practice in all Viking settlements or whether it was more of a luxury in certain regions. What we do know is that in larger Viking towns and cities, soap was used by people from all walks of life, not just the elite warriors. In fact, there's evidence to suggest that soap was a key part of daily life for farmers, traders, and even those who lived in the less glamorous areas of Viking society. It wasn't just about keeping warriors clean, it was about maintaining health across the entire settlement. Picture this. In a Viking village, after a long day of tending to crops or animals, a family might gather around a fire, sharing stories of their day and using soap to wash away the grime of the day. It wasn't just a personal ritual, it was a communal one. Soap helped maintain good health, reducing the risk of illness and making it easier for people to stay productive. The Vikings knew that when the community thrived together, they were stronger. Soap also played a role in helping maintain the status of certain individuals in Viking society. Just as warriors had their own personal rituals before heading into battle, so did some leaders and influential figures in Viking society. Cleanliness, it seems, wasn't just about hygiene, it was also about presenting oneself in a way that reflected one's status in the community. A clean body, just like a well-maintained ship or house, was a reflection of how well you took care of yourself and, by extension, your community. Let's take a detour now and look at something that might sound surprising. Viking soap was not only used for personal cleanliness but also played a pivotal role in their economy. That's right, soap wasn't just something you grabbed in the morning, it was an economic asset. Soap was traded, bartered, and even used as a form of currency. Imagine that. The Vikings had their own version of soap money. It wasn't about just buying the latest Viking jewelry or raiding for treasure. Soap had real value and was a highly sought-after commodity in Viking society. Historians still argue whether soap was universally accepted as currency in every Viking settlement, but there's strong evidence that it was traded as a form of exchange. It's easy to see why. Soap was essential to maintaining good health, and because of its usefulness, it became something that could be traded for food, supplies, or even weapons. Soap's versatility in Viking society gave it a unique position, and in some ways, it acted as a form of security for people living in harsh conditions. You could barter soap for whatever you needed, making it a vital part of Viking trade. But soap didn't just circulate among Viking clans. It was also traded with neighboring cultures across Europe and beyond. Through their extensive trade routes, the Vikings connected with the Byzantine Empire, the Slavic peoples, and even the Islamic world. As they traded furs, iron, and precious metals, they also traded soap, a humble item that proved to be as valuable as gold in some exchanges. The Vikings' ability to use soap in this way shows their innovation in taking something as simple as a cleaning agent and turning it into a commodity that held real worth in the marketplace. So, while Vikings were busy raiding and establishing settlements, they were also making soap, a commodity that helped connect cultures, facilitate trade, and even serve as a form of currency. Who would have thought that the unassuming bar of soap would play such a big part in Viking economy? Now, let's shift our focus to Viking women. If you've been imagining soap as something only used by Viking men before their raids, think again. Viking women, often left behind while their men sailed off to conquer new lands, had their own roles in society, and soap played a surprisingly important part in their daily routines as well. And here's the twist: soap wasn't just for keeping clean, it may have been a weapon in its own right. No, I'm not talking about launching bars of soap in battle, but rather how Viking women used soap in ways that enhanced their influence and power within their communities. Historians still argue over the exact role women played in the production and distribution of soap. Some suggest that women were the primary soap makers in Viking society, creating the soap from animal fats and wood ash, much like their male counterparts in the more public spheres of life. Soap making was a practical skill, and given its value as a commodity, women were likely tasked with both its creation and its trade. The fact that women held this valuable skill gave them an economic advantage, allowing them to barter soap in exchange for food, textiles, or other household goods. But soap's role in Viking women's lives wasn't just economic. It also had a cultural component. Viking women were often in charge of household management, and maintaining cleanliness was a key part of that. Soap was used to ensure the health of the family, but it was also a status symbol. A clean, well-kept home was a reflection of the family's status in Viking society, and women who were able to provide soap and other luxuries likely had a better position in the community. It was more than just hygiene, it was about maintaining the respect of the people around you. Now here's where the real kicker comes in. Soap also may have been used by Viking women in more subtle forms of defense. In a world where women often had to fend for themselves while their husbands and sons were off raiding, soap was a way of maintaining power. Imagine this. A woman with access to soap was not only cleaning her home but also maintaining a certain level of influence, keeping herself and her family healthy in a world where disease could wipe out entire villages. Soap, in a sense, became a shield, a small but powerful tool in the hands of Viking women. As we continue to explore the fascinating world of Viking soap, let's dive into its surprising connection to Viking rituals. If you've ever imagined the Vikings as solely warriors with a focus on battle and conquest, it's time to shift that perspective just a bit. The Vikings were also deeply spiritual, and many aspects of their everyday life, including soap, were infused with sacred significance. In fact, soap wasn't just used to cleanse the body, it was also believed to cleanse the soul. Historians still argue about how deeply embedded soap was in Viking religious practices, but it's clear that the Vikings saw personal hygiene as a connection to their gods. One of the most intriguing aspects of Viking culture was their strong belief in rituals that linked the physical and spiritual worlds. For example, before important events like battles, Viking warriors were known to undergo cleansing rituals to prepare themselves spiritually. The act of washing with soap was believed to rid the body of impurities, both physical and spiritual, ensuring that the warriors were pure and ready for combat. This ritual wasn't just about being clean, it was about aligning oneself with the gods and preparing for the challenges ahead. Some sources suggest that the Vikings even used soap in their sacred ceremonies, possibly as part of their offerings to the gods. Think about it. Soap, made from animal fats and wood ash, wasn't just a tool for the mundane. It was crafted with the resources of the earth and, in the eyes of the Vikings, held a deep connection to the natural world. The act of cleansing with soap was symbolic. It was about purification, renewal, and the preparation of the body and spirit for the next challenge. So, in many ways, Viking soap wasn't just a practical item. It was a sacred tool in their cultural and religious practices. Interestingly, this practice was not unique to the Vikings alone. Other ancient cultures, including the Egyptians and the Greeks, also believed that personal hygiene was connected to spirituality. But what makes the Viking perspective unique is the way they combined their practical needs with their spiritual beliefs, creating rituals that connected the two worlds. Soap, as simple as it may seem, played a surprising role in maintaining this balance between the physical and the divine. Now let's explore how soap influenced Viking customs and social structure. The Vikings were a complex society, where everything from personal hygiene to social status was deeply intertwined. Soap, while commonly associated with cleanliness, also had an impact on how individuals were perceived within their communities. It wasn't just about washing away dirt, it was about projecting one's status, wealth, and role in Viking society. Historians still argue over the extent to which soap was a marker of social class, but there is evidence to suggest that access to soap was, in fact, a luxury in certain parts of Viking society. While it was commonly used by many, there were differences in the quality and quantity of soap used by various social classes. Wealthier Vikings likely had access to higher quality soap, made with a finer blend of animal fats and possibly even infused with local herbs or perfumes. In contrast, those from lower social ranks may have used simpler, rougher versions of soap, perhaps even making their own with whatever resources were available. What's fascinating here is that soap, though a common item, could signal a person's wealth and position in Viking society. In the Viking world, appearance mattered. Being clean was not just about health. It was about showing that you could afford to be clean. A Viking warrior returning from a successful raid might use soap to refresh himself and show his fellow clansmen that he was a person of status, someone who had the luxury of cleanliness after a victorious journey. In this way, soap wasn't just a tool for personal hygiene. It became a form of social currency, a way to display one's position and success. But it wasn't just the warriors who used soap to signal status. Viking women, who often held significant power within their households, might have used soap as part of their daily beauty rituals, using it to clean and care for their hair and skin. Just like their male counterparts, they would have used soap to maintain their appearance and to show their status in society. Soap, in this context, acted as a subtle yet powerful indicator of one's place in the social hierarchy. Soap's connection to social customs also extended to its role in Viking feasts and gatherings. Imagine a Viking feast where warriors, traders, and leaders came together to share food and drink. The act of cleaning up before such gatherings could have been a sign of respect, a way of preparing oneself to take part in the communal experience. In this sense, soap served not just as a practical item but as a ritualistic one, reinforcing social cohesion and unity. As we move towards the end of our Viking soap journey, it's fascinating to look at how Viking soap myths and legends have continued to shape our modern understanding of the Vikings. Over the centuries, much of the Viking lifestyle has been romanticized or distorted. The idea of the warrior society, the longships cutting through the waves, and the berserkers charging into battle, all remain potent symbols of Viking power. But one thing that has been somewhat overshadowed in the modern imagination is the role that soap, of all things, played in shaping their legacy. Historians still argue whether Viking soap ever truly became a legendary artifact, but the impact it had on their daily lives was undeniably lasting. In a world where so many small details often get lost to time, soap's relatively humble role in Viking society has endured in unexpected ways. We see it popping up in various cultural representations of the Vikings, whether in books, movies, or even the occasional Viking-inspired health product. Some modern-day Viking soaps claim to use ancient recipes or ingredients, tapping into the Viking legacy of using nature's resources for practical, everyday purposes. It's as if soap, once a tool for survival, has now become a symbol of Viking endurance, strength, and cleverness. Interestingly, soap has also become a part of the Viking mythos in a more metaphorical sense. Just as soap cleansed the body and prepared Vikings for battle, it has come to represent the idea of purification and transformation in Viking culture. The idea that soap could symbolize cleansing not just the body but the soul has persisted, and in a sense, it's become part of the enduring Viking mystique. Modern myths about the Vikings tend to romanticize their connection to purity and strength, and soap, something as simple as washing away dirt, has been woven into that narrative as a powerful, almost mystical element. While some historians might scoff at the idea that soap played a more significant role in Viking history than we give it credit for, the fact remains that this humble bar of soap was more than just a cleaning agent. It was a symbol of Viking resourcefulness, practicality, and, perhaps most importantly, their commitment to health and survival. As the Vikings spread their influence across Europe and beyond, they didn't just take their weapons, ships, and gold, they also spread their knowledge of maintaining the body and mind, a legacy that includes something as simple yet essential as soap. In this way, Viking soap is both an ordinary object and an extraordinary one. It's an artifact of an ancient culture that was far more advanced in some ways than we often give them credit for. And as we look back on their history, it's important to remember that even the smallest, most mundane aspects of Viking life, like soap, had their own important role in helping to build their society and their empire. As we wrap up our journey through the surprisingly significant role of Viking soap, let's slow things down a little and reflect on the lasting impact these seemingly simple practices had on the world. Viking soap may have started as a practical tool, but it evolved into something far more. Something that helped shape the Viking way of life, the culture they built, and their influence on the world. From cleansing the body and protecting against disease to symbolizing social status and even spiritual purity, soap was intricately woven into the fabric of Viking society. Historians still argue about the extent of soap's importance in Viking culture, but one thing is clear: it wasn't just a hygiene item. Soap was a reflection of the Viking commitment to maintaining their physical health, their warrior spirit, and their role in society. It was part of the intricate dance between their daily routines and the rituals they believed would connect them to the gods. And as Viking trade routes stretched across Europe and beyond, soap played a surprising yet pivotal role in their economic exchanges, helping to cement their position as master traders and shrewd tacticians. Think about this. Soap, a simple mixture of animal fat and wood ash, was more than just a means to wash away the grime of battle. It was a bridge between the physical and the spiritual, the mundane and the sacred. Whether it was used in the preparation for a raid or as a currency for trade, it played a vital role in keeping the Vikings healthy, connected, and strong. In a time when health and survival depended on the smallest of advantages, Viking soap was a tool that contributed to their resilience. But let's not forget the most important thing about this whole story: it's a reminder of the power of the small, often overlooked aspects of history. We tend to think of the Vikings in grand terms: battles, longships, and warriors, but their day-to-day lives were shaped by the simple, practical items that helped them survive and thrive. Soap, as unassuming as it may seem, was one of those things that made a world of difference. So, as you close your eyes tonight, think about those ancient Vikings scrubbing away the dirt and salt of the sea, preparing for their next challenge. They weren't just warriors, they were survivors, craftsmen, and innovators. And in their own way, they proved that even the smallest details can leave a lasting legacy. Soap, of all things, became part of that legacy. Now, as we bring this journey to a close, remember that the Vikings, in all their wild and rugged glory, also embraced the simple acts that kept them healthy, strong, and connected to the world around them. So, let go of the worries of today just like the Vikings did before their battles, and rest easy, knowing that the world is full of fascinating stories, even in the smallest of details.